Morning came heavy and gray. The world outside glazed in rain. Mara sat at the kitchen table, a cup of untouched coffee cooling before her. Simon had slept on the couch. She'd heard him turn restlessly all night. Claire answered after 2 rings. "You ready?" Mara hesitated. "I need more time." "Mara, listen. I can keep this under wraps a little longer. But if he keeps working with her, it's going to get messy." Mara traced a finger through the condensation on her mug. "I know. Look, there's a middle ground. You don't have to blow it up. We can set a trap. Force her hand. Simon, too. See what they choose when it's all on the line." Mara let that settle. A test. No clean revenge, no immediate forgiveness. A way to strip away the last lies. "Set it up," she said finally. When she hung up, Simon was standing in the doorway again. How long had he been there? "Who was that?" he asked. Mara looked up at him, feeling a dangerous calm take hold. "Just a friend," she said, "helping me fix the broken things." For the first time in weeks, she smiled. It wasn't a kind smile. Simon flinched, almost imperceptibly. The trap was set. Now she just had to wait to see what crawled into it. The following Friday, Mara orchestrated a dinner party. "Just a few old friends," she told Simon, and he nodded, distracted. She watched him check his phone when he thought she wasn't looking. Claire was there, slipping seamlessly into the role of an old college friend. She flirted lightly with Simon, just enough to make him uncomfortable, to make him glance around, seeking Mara's reaction. It was later, when Mara accidentally left her phone unlocked on the kitchen counter, that the bait was fully laid. A fake text thread with Claire, suggesting Mara had found new evidence, suggesting Mara might go public. Simon saw it. Mara watched the realization crack across his face like a thunderclap. An hour later, when he thought she was in the bathroom, Simon slipped outside and made a call. Claire recorded every word. Mara listened from the pantry, heart hammering. "We have to move the money," Simon hissed into the phone. "Now! She's going to blow everything up." A long pause. "No, we can't meet at the hotel. Too risky. The cabin, maybe." Another pause, then Simon cursed and hung up. When Mara stepped out into the cool evening air, Simon was standing on the porch, staring out into the dark. He turned when he heard her. "Everything okay?" she asked, voice light, fake. He hesitated. Lied. "Yeah, just thinking." Mara nodded, the cool mask of her face unbreaking. She was thinking, too, of lawyers, of handcuffs, of freedom. The future was closer now, and this time it would be hers alone. The days that followed blurred into a strange limbo. Paperwork, whispered conversations with Claire, Simon's mounting desperation. He tried to play normal, picking up groceries, asking if she wanted to watch their old favorite shows. He even cooked dinner one night, badly, setting off the smoke alarm. Each gesture was a plea, wordless and frantic. Each one widened the hollow inside Mara. By Friday, the evidence Claire had gathered was in the hands of a prosecutor who promised discretion, but urgency. Simon's arrest could come within days. Mara hadn't decided if she would be there to watch it happen. That evening, after another brittle dinner, Simon leaned against the kitchen island, watching her dry dishes. "I know you're planning something," he said, voice low, almost defeated. Mara didn't answer. He stopped, ran a hand through his hair. "I deserve it. I know I do. But please, Mara, tell me what you want." She turned to face him. For a moment, she saw not the liar, not the traitor, just a man unraveling. And she hated him all over again for making her feel sorry. "I wanted you to be better than this," she said. Simon swallowed hard. His eyes shone with tears he was too proud to shed. "I can be." "No, Simon," she said, her voice sharp but not cruel. "You could have been. It's too late now." The words fell between them like stones. After he went upstairs, Mara stood in the kitchen a long time, the house creaking around her, the storm a distant drumbeat. She wondered if this was how it always ended, not in fire, not in screaming, but in this slow, unbearable unraveling of two lives once stitched so tightly together. Sunday morning at dawn, she packed a small suitcase and left the house without waking him. The keys to the cabin lay heavy in her pocket. When she arrived, the place felt even lonelier than before, shutters banging loose, the faint smell of mildew and old fires. Inside, she built one last fire in the hearth, a symbolic gesture she wasn't sure she fully understood. The flames licked at the dry wood, the room growing warm and bright. From the suitcase, she took the manila folder Claire had given her, evidence, testimony, photographs, and fed it, sheet by sheet, into the fire. The papers curled and blackened. Ash drifted up the chimney like absolution. She wasn't doing this for Simon. She wasn't doing it for revenge. She was choosing a third way. Not forgiveness, not destruction. Freedom. At midday, Mara sat on the cabin's small, rickety porch, watching the clouds thin into fragile silver ribbons. Her phone buzzed once, a message from Claire. "He's been arrested." "It's done, you're free." Mara stared at the words for a long time. She should have felt triumph, relief, something. Instead, there was only a stillness, like standing in the eye of a long, brutal storm. She breathed in the cool air, exhaled. The future loomed before her, uncertain and terrifying, but it was hers. Every cracked, terrifying inch of it, and this time she would not share it with anyone who didn't deserve her trust. Behind her, the fire guttered and died. Ahead, the road wound away through the thinning woods, open and waiting. The apartment was small but sunlit, perched above a used bookstore and smelling faintly of paper and rain. Mara sat cross-legged on the worn parquet floor, balancing her laptop on her knees. The clatter of the city moved outside her windows. Buses, groaning, street vendors calling, life threading itself into the air. Her divorce had finalized quietly. No dramatic court battles, no media frenzy. Simon had taken a plea deal for the embezzlement, sparing himself prison, but sentencing himself to a life in the margins. Disbarred, bankrupt, his reputation ash and smoke. She heard about him sometimes. Through Claire or mutual friends, she hadn't yet entirely cut loose. He was living with his sister 2 towns over, working construction jobs under the table. Trying, they said, to start over. Mara didn't think about him often. When she did, it was like remembering an old injury, dull, faded, but still sensitive. If she pressed too hard, this new life of hers was raw, unvarnished. She worked at a nonprofit now, nothing glamorous, but deeply satisfying. She was relearning simple things. How to laugh without suspicion, how to be alone without feeling lonely. One Saturday morning in early spring, Claire convinced her to visit the farmer's market. It was muddy and crowded, children shrieking. Dogs barking, musicians tuning their guitars on the sidewalk. Mara wandered away from the booths, aimless, until she nearly collided with someone rounding a corner. "Sorry," she said automatically, stepping back. The man smiled, an awkward, lopsided smile. Mid-30s, maybe a little older, a little rumpled, kind eyes. "No harm done," he said. They stood there for a second too long, neither moving. Something warm flickered in Mara's chest, unfamiliar and terrifying. He nodded toward the apple stand behind her. "You recommend the Honeycrisps or the Galas?" he asked, half joking, half inviting. Mara opened her mouth, closed it, then smiled. Small, cautious, real. "Depends," she said. "How much sweetness can you handle?" He laughed, a real, full sound. They talked for a few minutes. Apples, music, The absurdity of $7 organic kale before parting ways. No numbers exchanged, no promises. But something had shifted. Later, walking back to her car with a bag of apples, swinging at her side, Mara felt it. Not hope exactly, but the first fragile seam of it. She would never be the woman she had been before Simon's betrayal. But maybe, just maybe, she could become something stronger. Someone who trusted again, not blindly but bravely. The city breathed around her, fast, chaotic, alive. And Mara, carrying her cracked but mending heart, breathed with it. It happened on a Tuesday of all days, gray and forgettable, the air thick with the threat of rain. Mara had ducked into a coffee shop near the nonprofit's office, looking for caffeine and a few quiet minutes before her next meeting. She was stirring a packet of sugar into her coffee when the door jangled open behind her. She felt him before she saw him. Simon. He looked smaller somehow. Not physically, but as if life had filed him down. His hair was longer, flecked with gray at the temples. He wore jeans and a windbreaker, the same stubborn scuff on the toe of his boot that he used to promise he'd fix one of these days. For a moment, neither of them moved. Then Simon's eyes found hers, widening in something like disbelief or regret. Mara forced herself to breathe, to stay rooted. She turned slowly back to her coffee, giving him space to walk away. But he didn't. He approached quietly, like someone stepping across broken glass. "Hey," he said, voice roughened at the edges. She looked up, meeting his gaze fully for the first time in over half a year. "Hey," she replied, neutral. He shifted awkwardly, the way people do when they're carrying the weight of 1,000 things they know they can't say. "You look good," he said after a beat. Mara gave a small, non-committal smile. "I'm better." Simon's throat bobbed. He glanced down at his hands, then out the window where rain had started tapping lightly against the glass. "I'm sorry," he said finally, the words sounding almost too heavy for him to lift. Mara believed him. It didn't change anything, but it mattered somehow that he said it aloud. "I know," she said. Silence stretched between them. Not the brittle, angry kind. Something gentler. Sadder. "Are you—" Simon hesitated. "Are you happy?" Mara considered. "It. Not out of cruelty, but honesty." "I'm getting there," she said. Simon nodded once, as if he had no right to ask for more. He shoved his hands deep into his jacket pockets. "I won't keep you," he said. He turned to go, and for a moment, Mara almost called after him, almost asked if he was getting there too, but some things were better left unsaid. As the door swung shut behind him, Mara sat back, exhaling. It wasn't closure, not exactly, but it was enough. Outside, the rain softened, turning the city to a blur of wet light and color. Mara sipped her coffee and opened her laptop. There was work to do. There was life to live. And finally, she was ready for all of it. Of course, let's continue thoughtfully. Since the story has reached a natural emotional closure, the next phase would show Mara stepping into her future, not just surviving, but thriving, while still acknowledging the scars. I'll extend, naturally from the moment in the coffee shop, the quiet of glass, epilogue. Later that evening, Mara found herself walking after work, cutting across streets she hadn't wandered in years. No destination, just movement. The rain had stopped, leaving everything glazed and shimmering under the streetlights. She passed a little gallery tucked between a locksmith and a laundromat, tiny, with cracked gold lettering on the door. Kenton Art Collective. Something about it pulled at her. Inside, the space was warm and hushed, smelling faintly of turpentine and dust. Canvases leaned against the walls, sculptures jutted up like strange, frozen dancers. Mara drifted toward a series of paintings near the back. Abstract. Works, all jagged lines and muted colors, but there was something hopeful about them too. In one, a cracked porcelain figure knelt, mending itself with threads of gold. She read the small placard beside it. Kintsugi, an art of repair, honoring the breakage, not hiding it. Mara stood there a long time, feeling something inside. Her loosen, unwind. She wasn't untouched by her past. She wasn't unscarred. But maybe, like the painting, she could weave something beautiful from the damage. When the gallery owner approached, smiling warmly, Mara surprised herself by speaking first. "Is that one for sale?" she asked, pointing at the gold-threaded figure. "It is," the woman said. "It's called Becoming." Mara smiled. A real one this time, not the brittle mask she'd worn for so long. "I'll take it." She left the gallery with the wrapped painting tucked carefully under her arm, her heart feeling strangely buoyant. Outside, the streets gleamed. The world pulsed forward, messy and bright and unstoppable, and Mara walked into it. Mending, yes. Becoming, always. End. The tiny apartment above the bookstore was gone. Mara had moved 6 months ago, trading it for a sun-washed loft on the quieter side of the city, with wide windows and shelves that sagged under the weight of second-hand novels. The painting, Becoming, hung above her desk now, the gold threads gleaming in the afternoon light. It was Saturday. She was barefoot, a mug of tea cooling beside her, a book open but forgotten in her lap. Music played low from the old record player she'd found at a flea market, Ella Fitzgerald crooning about love, loss, and everything in between. At 4:15 p.m., the buzzer sounded. Mara rose, smoothing her jeans, heart quickening in a way that was no longer pure fear, but not pure comfort either. When she opened the door, Alex stood there. He wasn't extraordinary in the way Simon had once been. Simon had dazzled, had performed. Alex was different. Steady, a little awkward, with a smile that came slow and genuine. He held up a brown paper bag. "I brought dinner," he said, "and possibly too much wine." Mara laughed, stepping aside to let him in. They moved easily around each other now, though it hadn't started that way. The first months of seeing Alex had been halting, uncertain. Mara had learned how to speak her fears aloud, how to say, "I need space without guilt," how to say, "I'm scared" without apology. Alex had listened, and more importantly, he had stayed patient. Over Thai food eaten cross-legged on the floor, they talked about everything and nothing, terrible movies, childhood, memories, the absurdity of adulthood. At one point, Alex leaned back against the couch, studying her. "You seem different lately," he said, voice low. Mara twirled a strand of hair around her finger. "Good different?" He smiled. "Yeah, lighter." She thought about that, about how grief and betrayal had once weighted her so heavily she couldn't imagine ever feeling light again. "I'm still figuring it out," she said honestly. Alex nodded. "Me too." There was no rush in him, no pressure, just the quiet offer of company along the road. Later, as the evening stretched into night, Mara stood at the window, watching the city lights blink like distant fires. She still carried scars. She always would. But they no longer felt like open wounds. They were part of her, stitched-in lessons, golden seams. Mara pressed her hand to the window glass, feeling its cool solidity. Behind her, Alex shifted on the couch, drowsy and content. Smiled to herself. Not because everything was perfect. Not because she had forgotten. But because she was still here, still open, still becoming. Outside, the city pulsed and glittered. Inside, Mara finally felt at home. The end. Weeks later, Mara sat in the back row of the community center's meeting hall, notebook balanced on her knees. The smell of coffee and cheap paper filled the room, warm and grounding. It wasn't therapy exactly. It was a support group, half storytelling, half quiet listening, for people rebuilding after betrayal, after loss. Mara hadn't planned to speak, but when the woman in the front, in a battered denim jacket, talked about how betrayal hollowed you out, how it made you doubt even your own instincts, Mara felt something lift inside her, like a dam breaking. Her hand went up before she could second-guess it. The room turned toward her, faces open, expectant. Mara cleared her throat, heart hammering. "I used to think," she said slowly, "that healing meant going back to who I was before." She looked down at her hands, tracing the thin gold bracelet at her wrist, a gift she'd bought for herself the day her divorce was finalized. "But I'm realizing you don't go back. You don't erase the cracks. You learn to live inside them. You find new ways to be whole." A small, affirming murmur rippled through the group. Mara smiled, a little shaky but genuine. Afterward, as she gathered her things, an older man with kind eyes stopped her near the door. "Thank you," he said. "Sometimes the hardest part is believing it's even possible." Mara nodded, tucking her notebook under her arm. "It is," she said. "Hard, slow, messy, but possible." She stepped out into the evening air, letting it fill her lungs. The city thrummed around her, alive, imperfect, dazzling. Mara walked toward the subway, the weight on her shoulders lighter than it had been in years. The future was still cracked, still uncertain, still utterly hers. And this time she was ready to meet it. Flaws, fractures, golden seams and all. True final end. Mara stood in the middle of her own gallery, surrounded by the soft glow of lights and the quiet hum of conversations. The walls were lined with vivid, textured canvases, many her own work now, though some were pieces from artists she'd met through the years. The gallery was hers, a space she had fought for, nurtured, and watched bloom. Her fingers gently brushed the frame of a large painting, a swirling composition of dark and light, inspired by the piece that had once hung above her desk. She'd titled it "Reborn in Gold." Across the room, a couple stood admiring it, lost in conversation. Mara smiled to herself. She had built this place from scratch, piece by piece, just like she had rebuilt her own life. A soft voice broke her reverie. "You okay?" Alex's voice was warm, and he stood next to her, a glass of wine in his hand. Mara turned to him, her smile reaching her eyes. "I'm more than okay." Alex grinned, brushing his hand against hers. "You sure?" he teased. I did promise you a wild night out, but I guess I can let you work for a bit." She laughed, shaking her head. "Maybe later. Right now I'm just grateful." For a long moment, they stood there, looking at the gallery that felt like an extension of themselves, both quietly proud. "5 years ago," she said, "I never would have believed I'd be here. But here I am." Alex smiled, his eyes full of warmth. "Here you are. And I'm so glad." Mara met his gaze, a soft, understanding look passing between them. No need for more words. They both knew how far they'd come and how far they still had ahead of them. The gallery buzzed with life around them. Music, laughter, the soft clink of glasses. Mara looked around, taking it all in. The weight of the past no longer held her back. The cracks had transformed into the very foundation of who she was becoming. Outside, the evening air was cool, the city lights twinkling under the vast sky. Mara squeezed Alex's hand, a quiet promise in the motion. The future was still. Uncertain, but it was no longer something to fear. It was something to build, just as she had with every step of her own healing. And as she gazed around at the vibrant gallery, at the life she had created from the rubble, she felt, for the first time in years, that she could truly say, "I'm home." But now, after the guests had trickled out and the evening had settled into a soft quiet, Mara found herself standing by the large window that overlooked the city. She sipped her tea slowly, the warm liquid grounding her as the night wrapped around her like a soft blanket. Alex had left for the evening. He had meetings in the morning, but he'd promised to be back later. They'd been together for a while now, steady and warm, though neither of them rushed forward. They both understood that the past didn't disappear, and neither was willing to pretend that everything was perfect. Mara had changed so much in 5 years. She'd learned to trust again, yes, but trust wasn't a guarantee. It was something you chose every day. She trusted herself now, her instincts, her ability to rebuild. She knew that healing was not a one-time event, but a lifetime process. She wasn't angry at Simon anymore. The resentment had faded, like the last traces of a storm. It still lingered in places, occasionally rising, but she knew that it wasn't a weight she needed to carry anymore. Instead, she focused on how much she had gained from her journey, how far she'd come, how she had taken brokenness and transformed it into something new. Her phone buzzed, pulling her out of her thoughts. She glanced at the screen and saw a text from Claire. "How's the gallery? Celebrating yet?" Mara smiled, typing back, "It's perfect." Couldn't have asked for more. Then a second message followed, making Mara pause. "I heard from Simon. He's been asking about you. Wants to meet. Just wanted to let you know." Mara's fingers stilled over the screen. She hadn't heard from Simon in years. She'd received the occasional update from mutual acquaintances, but nothing that felt personal. The thought of meeting him again stirred a small, uncomfortable knot in her stomach. She set the phone down, breathing deeply. Would she meet him? Would she close that door entirely, or could there be some form of closure she hadn't yet found? She'd spent so long building this new version of herself. So much of her life now was centered on the art, the gallery, and the people who supported her. Could Simon's presence, even his apology, disrupt this delicate balance? Mara gazed out, at the city, the lights flickering beneath a starless sky. She could feel her heartbeat quicken, just the thought of facing him again, but maybe that's what she needed. Not for Simon, not for anything to be fixed, but for herself. She had built this life, and if there was one thing she'd learned, it was that even the most painful moments were part of her story. Not the whole story, but a chapter. Her finger hovered over the keyboard for a moment. Then she typed, "I'll think about it. Thanks for letting me know." She stared at the message, then hit send, the finality of it settling over her. It wasn't that she wanted to reopen a chapter that had closed. It was that she was ready to understand it, fully, in her own way. She wasn't the same person she had been when Simon had left her world in pieces. She was stronger now, not because she had erased the past, but because she had woven it into her new self. The phone buzzed again. "No pressure, just letting you know. Take care of yourself, Mara. Always here if you need." Mara smiled softly at Claire's text. She wasn't alone in this journey. She looked around the quiet, empty gallery, the walls covered in bold strokes of color, the stories woven through the artwork, each piece telling a chapter of struggle, beauty, and resilience. This gallery, this space, was her refuge and her creation. She could feel, in her bones, that life would never stop challenging her. There would be more changes, more twists, but she was no longer afraid of what might come next. With a deep breath, she turned away from the window and stepped back into the warmth of her gallery. She was ready for whatever the next chapter held. She knew that even the dark moments could hold their beauty. She wasn't just surviving anymore. She was living. And she was finally whole. Final end.